Number 10. Springlock doors. Something that has come up multiple times over the course of all of these games, a question that still has yet to be answered, is how do the doors open if the power turns off, considering that they're mechanical doors? Well, what if the doors are actually spring-loaded and it's the power that holds them in place, and then when they turn off they just snap upwards, I guess. The other strange thing in general about the doors is that they slide upwards, not sideways. That just means those straight looking sheets of metal are actually able to curl up somehow, being stored in the ceiling like a garage door, although I don't think that's what's happening, or that there is a wall directly above for that door to slide into, which would be a lot of convenient wall stacking, especially if this is a one-level building. Then it really doesn't make sense. Either way, I can only imagine that these doors would even be capable of springing open if it was the power alone keeping them shut, and that they are somehow spring-loaded to always be open, unless the power is on to push them down. That's the only way we can rationalize the way they work. Maybe this is also why our power runs out so fast as well. After all, I'm assuming it would take quite a bit of force and therefore power to keep them in place if they were spring-loaded. Number 9. Kelsey is Andrew. Kelsey is the new kid in one of the stories from Fazbear Frights number 3, 1:35 AM. Coincidentally, I think one of my favorite books in the Fazbear Frights series. The story itself is also titled appropriately The New Kid. It centers around Kelsey, who is a new kid at school that everyone likes because he is so friendly and good looking. In the end, Kelsey ends up being betrayed by his new friends that he's made, who try to scare him by taking him to an abandoned Freddy's location and making him dance around in a Springlock golden Freddy suit, which of course malfunctions, killing him. Later on, one of the friends comes back for Kelsey only to get stuck in the suit himself and see a corpse inside that doesn't seem to match Kelsey's appearance. This corpse is noted as having black curly hair, which led many fans of the books to speculate that Kelsey is in fact the vengeful spirit Andrew, who also appears in another story later on in the book series, The Man in Room 1280 from the 5th Fazbear Frights book. In that story, the vengeful spirit, whom many believe to be Andrew, one of the spirits that possesses the Stitch Wraith, appears as a dark boy with curly hair wearing an alligator mask. With a description of his hair matching that of the corpse found inside the Springlock golden Freddy suit, it's easy to see why people think Kelsey is Andrew. And friends, before we move on to our next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists about all of the Springlocks, so many Springlock things, so springy, so locky, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. PLUSHTRAP is from Sister Location. And what's more, might also be an older model Springlock suit? Based on what Circus Baby says about the Springlock suit we are stuck in coming from her old location, we could theorize that PLUSHTRAP is also a Sister Location Springlock suit, especially since PLUSHTRAP looks much older by comparison. But why do we think PLUSHTRAP is also a Springlock suit? Well, it's interesting that in the book Fetch, we learn more about the PLUSHTRAP animatronic, where it is implied that it can mimic the voices of other folks, something that prior to Fetch's release, only Sister Location animatronics seem to be capable of. This is what makes us think that PLUSHTRAP comes from Sister Location and perhaps was an older animatronic brought over from Circus Baby's previous location. While PLUSHTRAP doesn't really fit in with the overall aesthetic of Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, we do know that an older Springlock suit was also kept there. Does that mean that PLUSHTRAP is also an old Springlock that initially was its sister location, just based on the voice mimicking? If so, how did they get to be with the Nightmare animatronics? And also, who wore the PLUSHTRAP suits, if they were ever worn, if they were Springlocks in that way? Was it designed for a shorter employee, or possibly for kids to wear? Also, just to be clear, I'm not implying that that is the Springlock suit that we are in Sister Location when you're playing the game, because yeah. I don't know how tall Michael Afton is, but I don't think he's as small as PLUSHTRAP.
And at 7, Grimm Fredbear. Grimm Fredbear is one of the antagonists from Final Nights 3 Nightmares Awoken. He's only active on Night 5 and found in the left hallway. Grimm Fredbear resembles the normal golden Fredbear suit, only with his suit glowing a deep purple while the interior of the suit glows a bright white. His upper face appears to be torn off, including his eyes, leaving an empty, hollow, gaping hole in its place. The inside of the mask, though it appears like there's nothing really inside, actually conceals a white, pale human head that can only be seen during his jump scare. And before you ask, yes, it's mine. The animatronic is clearly meant to be a reference to Shadow Freddy and the theory that the Shadow animatronics were Springlock victims, which was later confirmed by Scott to be false when stating that William was the only victim of a Springlock failure. And in the museum level, which unlocks after Night 5, it is revealed that Grimm Fredbear is a Springlock victim, saying, quote, another Springlock failure victim, the second generation of Fredbear.
Number 6. Shadow Freddy and RWQFSFASXC. I think I said that all right. This theory, I believe, has been debunked, so just a word to the wise about that, but I still thought it was a pretty cool theory that existed, and I personally like the sound of it. I think it's a neat theory, hence why I'm gonna share it here with you, even though it's been discredited. But just know, we know that. The theory posits that Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie were both victims of a Springlock failure. Phone Guy talks about the sister location experiencing multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, leading some fans to think that might explain the shadow animatronics we see and what exactly they are. Spirits who are attached to the suits that they died in, but were for some reason unable to fully possess them, instead becoming a shadow-like version of that animatronic. I just think it's a cool idea. I mean, shadow animatronics are so mysterious to me, so when I find cool stories that could explain how they work, their theories, I love them.
Halfway through into number 5, Shadow Animatronics. One of the oldest theories is that the Shadow Animatronics are the first Springlock victims. This comes to us after the FNAF 3 Phone Guy dialogue that mentioned multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures, which some interpreted as multiple Springlock suits failing at once, since the term Springlock in this situation is used to describe the suit as a whole and the individual Springlock mechanisms that hold back all the robotic parts in the suit. So the line of multiple and simultaneous Springlock failures could mean multiple of the Springlocks inside the suit failing at the same time, or more than one suit failing at the same time. This led some to theorize that previous employees were killed in the Springlock suits, which is where the Shadow Animatronics came from. This is supported by the fact that these shadows are of Freddy and Bonnie, the two animatronics that have Springlock versions, and while there are holes in this theory, there is potential that this is the case. So the Shadow Animatronics are possible Springlock victims. I'm gonna have to keep saying that because people in the comments are gonna get mad. It's like, oh, they were Springlock. They could have been. It's possible, and that's the list, okay?
Number 4, Bite of 83. We know that Fredbear was the one behind the Bite of 83 based on the minigames we see in FNAF 4, and we also know that CC was the victim of said bite and eventually died of his injuries. But what we don't know is why the bite happened. However, if you look deep into the lore surrounding Springlocks, it feels like a no-brainer here. Sorry, no pun intended, crying child. Sorry about that. We already know that Springlock failures have pretty much been an ongoing problem since the creation of the suits, and we also know that Springlock failures on a massive scale eventually got these kinds of suits retired. So what if the Bite of 83 was the major beginning of that? What if the bite happened because of a Springlock failure itself? All the clues seem to be pointing us in this direction. A technical issue is the only real explanation is the animatronics themselves seem to have not been inherently malicious, not until they were bonded with spirits which lingered inside them, making them vengeful. And so if there wasn't a spirit in there, then we must assume there was a technical error, a Springlock malfunction.
And at 3, Am I Real? Am I Real, also known as Cake Bear, is presumably the primary and most recurrent antagonist in Dormitibus. Am I Real has 2 different forms. His first form is Cake Bear. Cake Bear's design originated from the Save Him minigame, where he delivered cake to children while a kid is murdered outside. He is the predecessor of both Fredbear and Freddy Fazbear. Cake Bear is a brown bear animatronic that also acts like a Springlock suit that appears in most of the main nights. Although they do look similar, the only similarities he has to Freddy Fazbear in reality is that they both possess a top hat, are brown, have blue eyes, and are a bear. Am I Real's second form is a form that resembles Springtrap, however. This form has a green color much like Springtrap and contains human remains. His right eye socket has gotten bigger on the side and a big hole can be seen on the right side of his head. His top hat has received some withering on it as well, and his lower jaw is slanted and worn down, no longer circular like Cake Bear's. He also has a sizable hole in the right side of his torso, revealing organs. Ha, lovely. Rips and tears cover his arms, revealing more human remains. He also appears to be missing at least one finger on his right hand, and it's absolutely terrifying to look at. Of course, 3 out of 10 of these are going to be from Dormitibus. Like, what did you think was gonna happen? Did you watch the Dormitibus animatronics list?
Number 2, Springlock suits were designed to malfunction. You have to wonder when you learn how easy it is for a suit to malfunction, if the suits themselves were ever actually made with the intention of functioning in a safe manner. It seems more likely that they were made with the intention to do harm. The Springlocks can malfunction if not wound up securely and properly before the wearer dons the suit. Not winding up the springs properly can result in them simply going back to their original position position, impaling the wearer. The thing that I find very suspicious is how a small amount of moisture, such as that which comes from heavy breathing or even just moisture in the air, can cause the spring locks to completely loosen. These are also suits that you'd think were intended for you to move around in, acting as the character you were dressed up as, and yet in sister location we are warned not to move too much, as this can actually set off the spring locks, implying either the locks were not at all secure when the suit was put on us, or that they are so temperamental that basic movements could set them off, never mind jumping around, dancing, or in general performing as the character that you happen to be dressed as, which is what I'd assume would be expected normally of an employee donning a mascot suit. Number 1. Henry sabotaged the Springlock suits. We don't really have a lot of clearly defined lore from the games that lets us know who really made all of the animatronics between William and his business partner Henry. In some continuities it's implied that William is more the inventive one, whereas in others William is more business savvy and Henry is more robotics savvy. It could be possible that the two were actually a little bit of both. I think that makes the most sense just based on everything we've learned about them. If this is the case, who's to say that Henry wasn't the one behind the Springlocks, and perhaps after losing his daughter, sabotaged said Springlock suits while in a vengeful state. When William, however, did not die from Springlocks impaling him, Henry had to resort to other means later down the road, like what we see in Pizzeria Simulator, with him rounding up all of the former animatronics and then burning the place to the ground. Or potentially with Henry being behind the burning down of Fazbear Fright, which also was a suspicious thing that happened, and we don't really know who's behind it, but I feel like Henry could make sense there.
And at 10, William Afton. Again, could William have suffered a Springlock failure before getting trapped in the spring bodysuit like we see in FNAF 3? It's possible, and it certainly appears like that's the case in the FNAF novels, since William is described to have scars that are consistent with the Springlock failure before becoming Springtrap in the novels. So could it have happened in the games? Could William have been the reason the Springlock suits were retired? Since we hear of an unfortunate incident at the sister location, so is that unfortunate incident William? There are plenty of people it could be, but William having to deal with it would certainly get them put out of commission for a time. But with William continuing to use the suit and putting it on when the room was wet like we see in FNAF 3's cutscene, it suggests that that's probably unlikely, but it's still possible. So since this list is possible Springlock victims, I think he deserves to be on this list, at least at number 10, since can we really talk about Springlock victims without mentioning good old Willie Afton? Exactly. And at 9, Henry Emily. Now this is certainly an interesting case, because seemingly Henry has died multiple ways across FNAF canons, with his first apparent death being in FNAF World at the hands of Baby. His death in the novels seems to have happened before Silver Eyes starts, and then he dies in FNAF 6 along with everything else. But could one of these deaths involve the Springlock failure, or something having to do with Springlocks? I mean, maybe Afton offed Henry in one of these realities, or maybe Baby has some Springlock mechanisms inside her when she killed Henry. Hell, maybe Henry just climbed into the wrong suit at the wrong time. It's a question that we don't really pay attention to because, well, Henry's death doesn't mean much to the story, unfortunately, but it's still true. Henry dying doesn't really mean much to the overall FNAF lore, and we didn't even know he was alive until FNAF 6, so maybe for irony's sake Scott had him bite the dust in a quicker way, rather than just, you know, burning alive, because that sucks. Maybe he wanted to prevent himself from even more severe agony so that he didn't possess something. And at 8, Phone Guy. Phone Guy's death is one of the most mysterious deaths of all. We hear him die in FNAF 1 on night 4 with the sound of multiple animatronics banging on his doors, but we never really get an explanation as to what happens to him. We know he dies, but other than that it's all speculation. One of the theories though is that animatronics got him and shoved him into a suit, resulting in a very painful death, especially since at this point the Springlock suits were either still in operation or hadn't been totally removed. The actual timeline of the events of the Springlock suits is a little messy since we don't really have years for things like them getting scrapped, yet it's still possible that Phone Guy was shoved into one or maybe used it to hide. After all, maybe Phone Guy is secretly William Afton and Scott just didn't want us to know that yet or something. I still feel like that might have been in the realm of possibility. Maybe not now, but it was.
Number 7. Kelsey is Crying Child / Cassidy. While Kelsey being Andrew could make some sense, others have speculated that the corpse found inside the suit actually belongs to Cece, Crying Child. This is obviously because of the physical description description of the corpse, which has curly black hair. A lot of people coming back to that curly black hair for a lot of these theories. This description matches the appearance of Crying Child, who also appears to have black and curly or wavy hair based on what we see in the games. But KELSEY is blonde. How does he fit in? Well, it is possible that KELSEY is the amalgamated manifestation of both Crying Child and Cassidy, who perhaps both haunt Golden Freddy if in this continuity they were both victims and have decided to share possession of the animatronic. Neither of them of course was blonde, but they could be changing their appearance together, using a disguise to go out in the world and trick bullies into trusting them. Cassidy could also possibly be considered the more aggressive personality, while Crying Child could be considered the nicer side, and also might bring the masculine appearance to the table when it comes to their disguise. Because obviously Cassidy was a girl, so yeah.
Minute 6, Bite of 87. The Bite of 87 is such an infamous incident that I can already hear people groaning in the comments. However, what if the victim of the Bite of 87, whoever that actually was a victim of a Springlock failure? It could make sense, since the animatronics had no harmful tendencies before this, so a Springlock failure is a reasonable assumption as to why someone got a frontal lobe removed. And a Springlock failure, assumingly, would definitely provide enough power to do that, since the Springlocks themselves would snap with such ferocity, and would probably circumvent the whole needing more power to do that thing. And if it was Jeremy, it would explain why the animatronics were suspended, because now one of their employees was bit and they had to promote him and fork over some extra cash to make sure that he didn't sue. So overall, whoever the Bite of 87 victim is could definitely have been a Springlock victim. Halfway through into number 5, Garvey. A psychopathic, cold-blooded killer. He stopped being human long ago. That's how Garvey is described in the extras of Dormitibus, the game from which he hails. Garvey is the penultimate antagonist of Dormitibus, and as a human, he was the man who murdered the missing children. He later went on to get trapped in Spring Bonnie, becoming Springtrap, and then was burnt to a permanent death in the Fazbear Fright's fire. Garvey is a more gory version of Springtrap from FNAF 3. However, he is not William Afton, as the game was released before the name reveal, even before FNAF 4. Springtrap, but with hardly any exosuit or animatronic casing, whatever you want to call it. He crawls on all fours and uses his left hand as a foot and his left foot as a hand, like some demonic monkey from hell that Satan didn't sanction the creation of. Just look at this thing and tell me that it shouldn't be on this list. If you do, you'll be lying. And at 4, Cassidy. Cassidy is the most mysterious victim in the missing children's incident. Her name was hidden for years, only really being discovered recently, and honestly we don't know too much about her. We don't know how she died, so the potential is there for her to be a Springlock victim. Maybe William knew that it would be easier that way. After all, she does possess Golden Freddy, who we figured was a Springlock suit, that ended up having the guts removed, hence the slumped overness. However, if this was the case and Cassidy's body was in that suit, they would have found it when they were gutting him. But maybe William was the one who gutted it, considering how he was the suit technician. And I mean, like, to be fair, for a suit technician, he did miss a fatal flaw with the animatronics that he literally designed, since, you know, he got snapped when the suit was wet. Either way, Cassidy being a Springlock victim would help explain a lot in the series. Just, you know, the hallucinations and whatnot.
Number 3, Funtime Bonnie is a Springlock suit. Funtime Bonnie really only appears in Sister Location as an empty head, but what if there is something else going on with this animatronic? After all, there is one animatronic who we also don't get a good look at in the game, but who we are pretty familiar with by the end of it, just based on our experiences. That would be the Springlock animatronic that we are stuck in temporarily. While we never see it explicitly, we also never get to see Funtime Bonnie explicitly either. This has led some to theorize that Funtime Bonnie is said Springlock suit and is the older animatronic that Circus Baby was referring to. The only thing that seems odd is how new we'd imagine Funtime Bonnie to look, but then again, it's more likely that the animatronics at Sister Location are actually really old and have just been well maintained and possibly refurbished, and possibly, you know, hidden away there. After all, Circus Baby's Pizza World seems to be one of the first locations, I think. This timeline is hard to keep track of, so forgive me if I'm wrong about something that has not actually been confirmed. So I guess we can't really be wrong about much.
And ultimately, in at number 2, missing children. Much like the Cassidy situation, the entirety of the missing children involved in the missing children's incident may have been Springlock victims. We're still unsure as to the method of extermination that William used on the screaming pests. Sorry, the kids who run around in my building hallways are they're still getting to me. If they ever go missing though, these videos are not going to help me. Anyway, we don't know how William dispatched of these kids before shoving them into the suits, and honestly there may not be a way that he killed them before shoving them in. The act of putting them in the suits may very well have been what killed them, which would make sense given that a Springlock incident would be more agonizing than a simple knife to the chest. And a Springlock collapse would be a more realistic way for the suits to start leaking blood and other fluids, since one knife wound wouldn't really do that, especially around their eyes. Even if the suits didn't like snap closed, if William shoved them into the suits, that's close enough for me. Finally, and at number 1, crying child. Okay, now this one is going to be controversial, but there is no way that I could do this list without mentioning one of the greatest debates in my DMs ever. The amount of people who message me on Instagram not asking about my game's Kickstarter, but rather the Bite of 83 and how it had to have been a spring locking bothers me to my core. I say this every time I'm bringing it up. I don't think that this was a Springlock failure. That being said, it's still possible, and that's what this list is about. The reason I don't think it was a Springlock failure is because the Fredbear suit was already in animatronic mode, meaning no Springlocks would have a chance of failing. Since, keep in mind, a Springlock failure refers to the Springlock mechanism failing to stay open, meaning it snaps back into animatronic mode. That's why it's bad if someone is inside, and there would be no Springlock mechanism in and around the mouth because it would always be in animatronic mode, since the jaw just moves up and down. But nevertheless, it's still a possibility, since logic and physics doesn't seem to apply to the FNAF world, which is made evident by those goddamn doors from FNAF 1. Even if they're electromagnet, they would still be open with power, so if they ran out of power, they would end up closing. Just saying. And at 10, Crying Child. Okay, so I'm putting this one at number 10 because I personally don't think that the Crying Child is a Springlock victim. To me, there's just no logical way that that animatronic jaw should have crushed his skull, because, you know, the Springlocks were already active and that would require a lot of power to crush a skull anyway. However, it is possible that since this is a series about haunted animatronics possessed by spirit metal, that logic kinda gets thrown out the window. So assuming that he is a Springlock victim, that's brutally scary. Being thrown into an animatronic's mouth and crying so much that you make the jaw snap onto your own skull, killing you instantly? Holy crap, that is nightmare fuel. That's why some people are scared of robots or animatronics, and while it may not be realistic, the possibility of it happening is still horrifying to say the least, especially since not even that long ago he lost his sister to Circus Baby, and that's pretty messed up. And I'm sure that Michael, who put the kid in his mouth, as long as, you know, I'm wrong about my theory, he'd be scarred for life. And I think I would be too. Before we move on to number 9, can you do me a favor and smash that like button and subscribe if you haven't yet if you are looking forward to this list. I saw a load of comments asking for it, so this better not flop. If it flops, so help me, you will all have a reckoning. The more likes we get, the more likely we are to do a part 2, and it also helps us against the algorithm almighty and lets us grow the channel, which means more cool vids for you, so you know, it's a win-win, so thank you. And at 9, The Twisted Ones. The Twisted Ones novel starts a year after the Silver Eyes ended, with Charlie in university. One day, however, Clay Burke comes to see Charlie, and for some reason brings her to see a corpse with familiar wounds. This could either be because she would recognize them, or because she was working with the police, or because they had to advance the plot. I don't know, I haven't read the original novels, but I want to. However, looking at the wounds, she confirms that they are in fact a Springlock failure, meaning that we have an unnamed Springlock victim in the Twisted Ones novel. If this character does have a name, like if it's revealed in later down the line or something, please let me know, because I couldn't find one online. However, while this may seem insignificant to you, the real horror of this number comes from what it signifies. This Springlock marks the return of William Afton, since at the same time, Clay also tells her that a blood sample they took from Afton showed that the body was a fake, or at least it was fake blood. The return of a killer, and the purple guy of all of them, that's pretty damn scary if you ask me. And at 8, The New Kid. Continuing with the theme of FNAF books, what about the story The New Kid from 1:35 AM, the third Fazbear Frights book? The story revolves around Devon, Mick, and Kelsey. Devon and Mick are outcasts. They aren't popular, they aren't cool, but when the new kid Kelsey arrives at their school, they make a new friend, despite Kelsey being charismatic and adored by everyone else in the school. Over time though, Devon grows jealous of Kelsey, since Kelsey has everything that Devon wants. So in an act of revenge or to gain control, because you know that's kind of serial killery, Devon hatches a plan to lure Kelsey to an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's to trap him in a Springlock suit for a couple hours, to try to humble him, I guess. But the plan goes horribly wrong. After getting in the suit, the Springlocks fail, as expected, because you know this is a FNAF book, causing Kelsey's blood to soak into the fur of the animatronic and pull around the ground. Devon and Mick leave Kelsey for dead so that they won't get in trouble, but something doesn't feel right. So a week later, Devon returns to make sure that Kelsey's body is still there, for some reason. He sticks his hand into the animatronic's mouth to feel if it's there, and snap! The Springlocks fail yet again, as per usual, and Devon gets his hand stuck inside the suit and bleeds out, but not before seeing a body in the suit, but with black hair instead of Kelsey's blonde hair. If that's not scary, then you need to go see a doctor, because that's bone chilling. That's messed up. No. And it's 7, Michael Afton. This relies on heavy speculation and assumption. However, if the entered enema is truly what killed Michael's body, then could it be considered a spring locking? We don't really know if the Funtime animatronics have spring locks, but we can assume that they do thanks to their moving parts and abilities like a giant claw that goes out and stores items. But this would also mean that Ennard would have at least some of those same parts. So if the Funtime animatronics that were made around the same time as the original Springlock animatronics used similar parts or techniques, which is likely, that means that Michael Afton would also be a Springlock victim. We don't need solid proof since this is a possible spring locking victims list, so proof of possibility is all I really need. And honestly, I think that this would provide a good explanation as to why he turned purple, since people who die don't turn purple. Instead, if they rot, they would most likely be depicted as green, especially when another major character is linked to the color purple. So, if that is indeed bruising, it would make sense if the Springlock mechanisms were hurting him from the inside out. And at 6, GRIMM CHICA. The first Springlock victim in the Final Nights series, GRIMM CHICA is a primary antagonist in Final Nights 3 Nightmares Awoken. Unlike others, she is not a Reaper animatronic. GRIMM CHICA holds a strong appearance to the Springlock suit on the poster in the Night 3 cutscene, but her faceplates are very hard to spot and she's almost entirely purple. She really resembles Toy Chica. The glowing accents inside of her resemble a human corpse. She lacks a bib unlike the original Chica, and her overall body is very slim like the original Toy Chica, except for her hips, which appear to be much wider. Got the baby birth and hips. I regret that immediately. And she lacks shoulders or upper arms, with her forearms protruding from her armpits. GRIMM CHICA is also revealed to be a Springlock victim in the museum level, saying, quote, "A victim of a Springlock failure, forever forced to haunt the suit she is wearing, now being manipulated by your sister and mother. Tried spray on tan, still very pale." Why is that so relatable to me? Like, no matter what I do, I'll always be pale and pasty. Not the whole being manipulated by your sister and mother thing. That's weird. But like, I'm okay with forever being pasty. However, I did rank this above Grim Foxy because like, it's Chica. And look what they did to my girl Chica. I'm sorry, Mommy Kentucky, for the transgressions.
Number 5, Yellow Suit. In FNAF 2 on Night 6, Phone Guy's call reveals that he is surprised you came into work at the location, as it is meant to be shut down for a while. He tells you that there was an incident that happened involving the yellow suit in the back, which many have theorized to be the Springlock suit used in the missing children incident, where 5 victims went missing. Some even think that this phone call is referring to that incident. Phone Guy claims that someone wore the yellow suit, and ever since, the animatronics have been acting strangely. Is it because they had victims stuffed into them? And possibly because those victims' souls are making the animatronics behave more aggressively because they're possessing them? I don't know, but it makes sense.
And at 4, Golden Call. As a human, when alive, Golden Call's name was Kyle. However, he is now a Springlock victim stuck inside a Golden Freddy Springlock suit. Golden Call has the typical rundown Springlock suit vibe, similar to Springtrap. However, this is even more gruesome. His left ear is bent, he has guts coming out of basically every hole in his body, human eyes are hanging out of the animatronic's eye sockets. He's even missing exosuit on his right foot, and the character is holding a flesh-colored, at least it's flesh-colored, it may be even like fully like a flesh phone in his right hand that stays stuck to his head via more flesh or blood strands connecting to the side of his head. It's horrifying, dude. This is a monstrosity. And looking at his age on the wiki, Kyle was only 5 when he got Springlocked, which is absolutely nuts and just flat out horrible. So unfortunate, man. He was supposed to be the next best Fortnite player. That's a joke for the long-term subs. You know it. Getting close to the end, into number 3, Kelsey. Kelsey is in essence the main antagonist of the Fazbear Fright story, the new kid from the third Fazbear Frights book 1:35 AM. Kelsey had just moved to town and ends up making friends with the protagonist Devin. Devin ends up getting jealous of how much everyone loves Kelsey, so he hatches a plan with his friend to trap him in a Springlock suit for a few hours. However, when they unleash their plan, the Springlock suit fails and kills Kelsey. At least, so they thought. Since a week later, Devin returns to make sure Kelsey is still there, for some reason, only to find a different body in the suit. He knows that it's someone else because the hair color is different, and then Devin gets stuck and bleeds out, only for the story to cut back to Kelsey meeting 2 more kids at his new school. This is an interesting story because while Kelsey did get springlocked, he ended up being fine. So what happened? Some think that Kelsey is a ghost, while some think that he's the one you should not have killed. But no matter what, we all feel like there is a high possibility that Kelsey was a Springlock victim, at least when they were alive. We don't know how and we don't know when, but it's a definite possibility. Penultimately, in at number 2, Springtrap. I believe we all know this story by now. Everything was going well at first. They couldn't pin him down and he was on his way to immortality. Once William discovered Remnant, however, he spiraled. He wanted to use it to fuel his life and make himself truly immortal. So in an effort to study it further, William lures possessed animatronics to the back room that they can't access and uses it to dismantle them, planning to melt down their endoskeletons to make soul-infused metal. However, by doing this, he unknowingly releases the souls of the victims he claimed oh so long ago. Shocked, he tries to scare them by getting into his spring body suit, which also coincidentally makes him feel more powerful. However, this haste coupled with the leaking in the back room causes the springlocks to fail, crushing him in torturous agony for the next 30 years. However, he didn't die from this. As we learn in the Man in Room 1280, he was being kept alive by the spirit of another victim. So he was living that agonizing pain for 30 years, and that makes him damn well deserving of the number 2 spot. And before you ask, no, him and Garvey are 2 separate characters, meaning that they can both be included on this list. You're welcome. Finally, in at number 1, you. A spoiler alert for a fan game, and if I say which fan game, it's going to spoil it. So if you want to avoid spoilers, click away now. And thanks for watching. I'll give you a chance to do that now. Okay, now that you've prepared for spoilers, A Shadow Over Freddy's is a FNAF fan game created by FizzNom on GameJolt. It released on April 25th, 2018, and since it was made by the same guy who is currently working on FNAF Plus for the Fazbear fanverse, you know it's bound to be good. The gameplay of A Shadow Over Freddy's is a hybrid between a traditional point-and-click game and a free-roaming horror game. The player wakes up to find themselves with no memories in a black and white abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and is tasked with surviving 5 nights in escaping the restaurant. The player is given a different task each night and must complete said task before 6 AM and without being attacked by any roaming animatronics. However, the ending of the game has you getting trapped in a Springlock suit and left to rot, meaning that you are a Springlock victim, which is probably the scariest victim of them all, cause I don't know about you, but I'd rather not get Springlocked. Although I know there are plenty of you that would just love that. You'd fill the suit with liquids that aren't blood, and that's messed up. Like, I'm not one for kink shaming, but yeah, there's kinks, and then there's like being killed, you know? I don't know how else to put that.